Hey guys, Mr. Davis here. What I want to do really quickly, well, as quickly as I can with this, is I want to try and cover some of the interactions that we have in ecosystems. We've talked a little bit about where resources are available. It's going to help determine what biome you're going to have. There's been some stuff on looking at how making those available will influence that and what ecosystem services are. What I want to do now is I want to look at some of the regulating things that go on inside an ecosystem that really deal with how species interact with each other. All right, so we've already established, what an omnivore is, a carnivore, an herbivore, those kind of things. Well, we're going to clarify a couple of those and get to some more specific definitions that deal with this. And we'll actually be able to build off of this and talk about how these roles function in ecosystem and how these can then work into ecosystem services in a little bit. All right, so let's take a look at this and see where we can go. All right, so let's take a look at some ecological interactions between organisms. So when you have multiple organisms in an area, you're generally going to have some kind of competition. All right. So competition is simply defined as when two organisms of the same or different species attempt to use an ecological resource at the same time. That's the baseline definition of competition. All right. So that could be food, could be water, could be shelter, and there's a number of different ways that animals and organisms, I shouldn't just say animals, I should say plants as well, that organisms approach this problem and then try and work through it. So here's an example. This is called interspecific competition. So this is competition between species. And I actually wanted to use a plant here because we always talk about animals and stuff like they're the only organisms. Well, plants make up a huge amount of the biome, so let's look at them. So I'm going to talk about a plant called kudzu. And if you look at the picture that I've got here, you can see that there is some kind of leafy material covering everything. Well, guess what, guys? That's all being covered by one species of plant. All that stuff in the foreground and across the ground there, leading up to those trees right behind there, that's all kudzu. It was introduced to America from Japan in the early 1900s. It is a relative of legumes, of beans, so it's able to fix nitrogen in its roots with root nodules, so it can grow really, really fast, much faster than native trees. It is a creeping vine, so it will climb up those trees, and it will actually cover existing trees and block out light from getting to them. Eventually, the trees will start to lose their foliage, and it just kind of takes over. So much so that it can actually kill off a local biome. It can actually destroy a local biome because it chokes out that sunlight so much. It's a real difficult thing to try and remove because the other problem is, how do you get rid of it? I mean, you have to send people in to cut it down and stuff like that, but it can grow up to a foot a night in the middle of the growing season. Yeah, it grows really, really fast. Um, there's been a couple of interesting solutions that have involved bringing in animals to just overgraze it, just packing cattle into one area and they just tear it down, they just eat that stuff. But it's hard to get rid of. And spraying herbicides, which are things that kill plants like Roundup, well, you stand a good chance of killing the native plants too. So that's not really helpful. So that's a type of competition. This plant is super used to competition, so it tries really, really hard to get all the light that it can. In its native environment, there's other stuff that eats it, and there's controls on it, but here, that competition is removed from it, so it's just out competing everything. It is just stripping away any competition. All right, then you have intraspecific competition, and this is competition within a species. So that's like monkeys will compete with each other for food, or rams will compete with each other for mates. All right. So this is intra. So interspecific is between two or more species. Intraspecific is between or within its own species. All right. So here's the thing. To avoid competition, sometimes animals will go into a specific niche. So I've seen this pronounced niche. I've seen it pronounced niche. Whenever I've heard about it, heard about this being talked about for the purposes of ecology, the term niche is what I've always heard. So that's kind of how I'm going to be pronouncing it. Okay. So the niche is the is the ecological zone that something inhabits. Basically, it is the place where an organism lives and the role that that organism plays in the habitat. All right. And so by having a specific niche, that will sometimes limit competition. So if you have a specific flower that's only pollinated by one type of insect, that flower does not have to compete for pollination, and that insect does not have to compete with other insects to get the nectar from that flower. Those are ways that you can have that partitioning of a resource. So here's one, though, that's a little bit more general, because it can also be general as well. The ecological niche of a sunflower is growing in the backyards, absorbing light, water, nutrients for photosynthesis, providing shelter and food for other organisms such as bees and ants, and giving off oxygen to the atmosphere. Real simple. It's pretty, all right? The ecological niche of an organism not only depends on where it lives, but what it does. By analogy, it might be said that the organism's habitat is its address and the niche is its profession, biologically speaking. So here we're looking at worms, and where they live is in the ground, and what they do is mix up the soil. More specifically, they are partial decomposers, so they will eat the organic matter that's in the soil. It churns that up. Basically, that's an ecosystem service that the worm is providing. Yeah, you can go out, and if you're a farmer, you can go out and buy worms that are cultivated that will help with aeration of your soil, help with decomposition, and if you put them into your field at the end of the growing season, they can actually help with your nutrient recycling. Yeah. All right, here's another interaction. Predation. All right, so we already talked about carnivores. That is when one organism captures and feeds on another. And you've got the very dramatic examples that I have down in the bottom right there, down there. And those are a snake eating a frog, swallowing it head first, or you've got a pack of lions trying to take down a Cape buffalo. But, I mean, come on, guys. This predation can go all the way down. So over there, I've got two single-celled organisms, and one is actually engulfing the other one and consuming it. Yeah, those are single-celled organisms, and there's still predation going on. So this happens at all levels of life organization there. The predator is the one that's going to do the killing, whereas the prey is the one that's the food. All right, so the predators are the lions, the snake, the engulfing protist, and then the prey is the other protist, the frog, and the Cape buffalo. As you have a change then in the population of a prey item, you will have a change in the population of the predators. Yeah, so take a quick look at this graph. You have the snowshoe hare and the lynx, also called a bobcat. Here in Arizona, we call them bobcat. They're very, very similar species. Okay, so you've got the snowshoe hare. That's the one little bunny there running away. Run, bunny, run. No, bunny's not going to get away. And then you have the bobcat or the lynx there. And what you can see is on the graph, if you look at the red line, that's the population of the lynx. Whereas if you look at the black line, that's the population of the hare. When you see a spike in the hare population, shortly thereafter, you will see a rise in the lynx population. But notice how the lynx population can never really exceed the population of the hares. All right, they are limited by the total prey availability. All right, but they will move in time with that. And when we start talking about population dynamics, we'll dive into this a little bit more. But there is a link between them. Okay, symbiosis. How many of you guys have heard of symbiosis before? And I bet you guys already have an idea of symbiosis. And you're going, Mr. Davis, that's like the clownfish, like Nemo. That's Nemo. Nemo's symbiotic. Yeah, okay, great, fine, whatever, Nemo. Nemo, or the clownfish, as we should say, Ocellaris. Ocellaris there is symbiotic with that anemone, but it may not be in the way that you think. All right. So symbiosis is any relationship in which two species live closely together. All right. But there are different ways that this can go. Now, if you look at that honeybee and the flower, that is a mutualistic relationship, which I will show you in just a sec, the definition of it, but they're both benefiting. That clownfish, though, the clownfish benefits, but the anemone, studies have been showing that it actually doesn't really get that much of a benefit. So mutualism is the insect and the flower. They are both benefiting. If you can think of any other examples, go for it. But that clownfish and that anemone is often given as an example of mutualism, but it's not. It's actually commensalism. All right, so commensalism is where one benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. All right, so with the clownfish gets a benefit. It gets food, it gets shelter, it gets protection from larger predators, things like that. The anemone really doesn't get anything out of it. Now, here's another one. These are pictures of the top of a humpback whale. Humpback whales get barnacles attaching to them at certain points. The thing is, it doesn't seem to hurt the whale in any way. It doesn't seem to cause any serious drag or any issues like that. They only really attach at certain places on the whale, generally where there's already a rougher patch of skin that exists there to prevent them from rubbing too hard or getting damaged when they rub against other whales or when they're feeding. Um, but the barnacles get a free ride around the ocean, and barnacles are filter feeders. So by being moved around the ocean, they're getting a constant supply and constant access to the plankton that they eat in the water column, the little microscopic organisms that they consume. So the barnacle is getting a great benefit from this. The whale, not so much. I mean, the whale's not being hurt, but it's not doing anything for it. All right. So then you have commensalism. Okay. This is the same kind of thing. All right. So in the commensalism, again, one of them is helped, the other one is neither helped nor harmed. You have remoras. They'll attach themselves to a shark. The shark doesn't really seem to care. The remora actually has modified scales on its dorsal side, which let it suction onto the shark. Shark doesn't care. I mean, if the shark really cared, he could whip around real fast and probably eat the remora without much difficulty. Birds building nests in trees. Again, doesn't help the tree, but it doesn't hurt it either. Then you have parasitism. Okay, now parasitism is sometimes classified as a very specific type of predation, but it is a little different. All right, so typically in predation, one organism is attacked, killed, and eaten. But in parasitism, the host is usually harmed and the parasite benefits, but the host doesn't usually die immediately from that. So the example of a parasite would be fleas on a dog. All right. So the dog is harmed by this, potentially picking up dangerous infections, losing blood, losing energy, losing nutrients. The fleas get food. They're growing. They're going to get more massive, and they're going to have more fleas, and they're super gross. But it doesn't kill the dog directly usually. Now, it can be sometimes what's classified as a comorbidity, so it can be part of a bigger problem that the dog has, but it's not going to kill the dog directly. Some more examples. Wasp eggs on the back of a caterpillar. Now, this is a very specific type of parasitism. And in this one here, it can actually and will often actually lead to the death of the caterpillar. But this is also an ecosystem service as well, because that caterpillar is going to be eating the plants and tearing them down. And wasps can actually parasitize on them. The juveniles eat the caterpillar, and they actually act as a natural insecticide, basically. Here's another one. Lampreys feeding on the fluids of other fish. Lampreys will suck blood from other fish. They have no mouth, really. They've just got this like big, weird, flat, paddly thingy covered in teeth that like scratches away and sucks blood. But they don't usually kill the fish directly from that. If you get a whole lot of lampreys on one fish, it can get real sick from that. If they drain too much blood from that fish can get sick as a result of blood loss and nutrient loss, basically. And then on us, that is a mosquito. Mosquitoes are the deadliest animals on Earth. I'm not kidding. They really are. Mosquitoes kill more people than any other animal on Earth. They carry horrible diseases. Malaria kills more people every year than pretty much wars at this point. So, yeah. Hey, deadliest animal on Earth is the mosquito. Hey, they parasitize us. They land on you, they bite you, they suck your blood. All right. So, mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism. All right. Well, over on this side, so over here, you can see these little buggies right here. These ones here. These are called aphids. And they're like ticks, but for plants. Well, there you go. They're sucking the nutrient out of that plant. All right. Then you have the ladybug here that's eating those aphids. Well, there's two different relationships going on here. You have parasitism on the plant from the aphids, but you've got mutualism going on between the ladybug and the plant. So the ladybug gets a meal, gets to eat the aphids. The plant gets a pest removed. That's a benefit. Then you got these little birdies here. These birds live on top of this cebu, this type of cow, basically. And what they do is they are mutualistic. They hang around this cebu because bugs come after this this cow here and try and bite it. They eat the bugs. They also sit on their back, and it gives them a vantage point above the grass, and it lets them watch out for predators. They'll then call out when a predator is near and actually warn the cebu. So the cebu gets cleaned, and it also gets a warning system. So there you go. So you've got multiple interactions going on here at the same time, because remember, those bugs, those are parasites. All right, how about this one? What is it? All right, so I'm going to leave the answer to this one down in the comments, but what kind of relationship would this be? Think about what butterflies do for flowers. All right, so now from there, here's where we're going to go. Now I want to make sure that I point out this picture to you again. Okay, look at that triangle. That's a pretty cool triangle, isn't it? Okay, no, look at the triangle, and you can see that across the bottom, all right, so essentially across the x-axis, you have the amount of available moisture going from more precipitation to less precipitation, okay? Then look at the y-axis, where you have a decreasing temperature. So the biomes are these large terrestrial regions that have similar climate, soil, and organisms, despite being on very different locations on the planet. But the reason why they are so similar, all right, is because the annual precipitation and the annual temperature are generally similar. All right, so you can find them all over the planet, and you can look at them and go, ah, well, that looks like this, and this looks like that, and you can even transplant organisms from one to another, and a lot of times they'll do well. A great example of that is palm trees. Palm trees are not native to Arizona, but we have a lot of different type of date palm that have been transported here from other desert regions, because our desert is similar to the deserts that they come from. So they do well here, all right? Similarly, you can take the prickly pear cactus from here in Arizona, and it's been transplanted to some of the hotter regions in Italy, and it has just taken off, and it grows extremely well there. Also, there's nothing there that knows how to eat a cactus, but the prickly pear fruit is really well liked, especially in Sicily. So there we go. That's a transplant that can happen because of a similar biome. All right, so when we look at biomes, there are three major groups, and you can already see that being represented over there. They are deserts, grasslands, and forests. But those deserts, grasslands, and forests are going to have unique characteristics depending on how the amount of water and what the temperature is shifted. All right, there is a very big difference between the Sahara Desert or the Atacama Desert, both of which are higher altitude, even drier than Arizona, much closer to the equator. So if you compare that then to the desert here in Arizona, there is a difference. We are a temperate desert. Those are tropical deserts, okay? So that's something that we can look at, and we can see how those deserts are different, all right? So even though I'm going to say that there are three main biomes on land, there are many divisions that we can make with them. So because it's all about water and temperature, we can take a look at that and we can graph that across the surface of the planet, all right? If you have an area that is close to a body of water, generally speaking, it's going to have a more even temperature. It's going to have milder winters and more consistent summers, generally going to have a greater access to rain, but you're also going to have areas which are separated from bodies of water. A lot of times they will be much drier and oftentimes a lot hotter as a result. Okay, so typically the area near the coast will receive more rainfall and have a more even temperature. Areas that are inland will have less precipitation and a more seasonal cycle to their precipitation. Why this happens, though, is kind of interesting. So let's take a look at that. You guys remember how you have water which will be evaporated up, it will travel up into the atmosphere, condense, and then rain back down. You also remember that land will heat up faster than water will. Well, let's take a look at a couple of extreme examples here. So right here, this is Hawaii. Hawaii is in the tropic zone, and if you look at the northern shore of Hawaii, right here, you have a tropical rainforest. The city of Hilo is up here, all right? This slope of northern Hawaii is extremely wet. There is a ton of rain there. Pretty much every day it will rain. But on the other side of the island, you see almost no vegetation there. It's the same island. It was formed at the same time. The soil is the same. The rock, the material the island's made out of is the same on both sides. But the difference is the wind in Hawaii comes from the north and east. All right. So all the warm water that's over here in the ocean that was heated up by the solar radiation in the tropics and just warming up that water picks up all this moisture. It comes over here to the mountain, drops all of that moisture when it comes inland, and then on the other side of the island, it doesn't get any. So the farther water has to travel inland, the more likely it is to fall with some kind of precipitation. The higher an air mass moves in the atmosphere and the less moisture it can carry. So the farther up you go in the atmosphere, less moisture there is. At very high altitudes in the troposphere, that's the first layer of the atmosphere where we are and where all mountains are, it will be extremely dry and carry very little moisture. If you've ever traveled in a plane, you may remember that there's a point when you're flying in a plane, you get up above the clouds, and it looks like it's just a flat landscape of clouds. It just stops. Well, that's because that reaches a point where the air can no longer support those droplets of water. The air becomes so thin, it can't keep those tiny droplets of water aloft, and they just kind of separate out there. So before the air can go up to those altitudes, it has to shed its water to continue to rise. Eventually, though, you get so much moisture being shed at the same time, you get rains. So because of this, mountains will have a wet climate on the windward side, and that's the side that gets the most rain, and a drier climate on the leeward side. It's called a rain shadow, and you can see it on satellite images. You can see it all over the world, and heck, you guys live in a rain shadow right now. We're down here in the valley. We've got mountains on all sides. So as moist air tries to reach Arizona, reach the valley, a lot of times it will get stuck and it will precipitate out in the highland areas. And then down here in the valley, we just have this boiling mass of hot air that stays right on top of us, and we don't get as much moisture. The monsoon season is where the wind pattern shifts just enough to allow more of that moisture to come up through some of the areas south of us where there are fewer mountains, and we'll oftentimes get rainstorms as a result of that. Unfortunately, lately, it's been so hot that it's too hot for it to rain. It is literally so hot that the air is drying out before it can get to us, and we are just not receiving the proper monsoon season. This year's been the hottest year on record, and that's an effect that we can definitely see. So when I talk about the rain shadow effect, you guys want to know that. That is where you have a windward side, you have moist rising air, it condenses to water vapor, it condenses to clouds, precipitates out, and you get a lot of vegetation on that side. Then the rain shadow region is the area after that where you're going to have dry descending air coming down, and you're not going to have as much moisture. Okay, guys, so here's some final thoughts. So all ecosystems have competition for resources. Okay, that can be food, shelter, water, sunlight, necessary minerals or materials, any of those things. All right. Organisms reduce the amount of competition they experience by finding a specific niche or fitting into a place in the ecosystem, a specific location, and finding a specific job. All right. Terrestrial biomes then are shaped by temperature, usually driven by sunlight, and moisture. All right. The availability of these two shapes the plant species that you'll have there, and the plant species will oftentimes shape the animal species. Coastal areas will typically receive more moisture as precipitation, while inland areas will usually be more dry. All right, guys, that's going to end my time talking about part 3 of this introduction to ecosystems. Next time, we're going to go over the 3 main types of biomes: deserts, forests, and grasslands. We'll break those up a little bit, and we'll look at how they can be different at different latitudes, different distances from the equator. All right, take care. Have a great day. I'll see you all soon. Bye, guys.